Hey, Tim, it was good to hang out with you this past weekend. Thanks for helping arrange that.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You want to tell them what we built so that
You mean
pretty epic?
You mean the whole project from I don't know, has it been 2 years now?
Yeah, it's coming up on 2 years.
Yeah. So through a gracious set of donors, Ironcenturion built a shooting range that actually is out on a private ranch, and it goes out to 1 mile. So we have targets at 250 meters all the way up to 1,600 meters, actually all the way out to a full mile. And it's a lot of fun to get to take some time and go out there and use the range. It's a pretty elaborate setup, and we've done several events there. It is. And Tim, I have I grew up enjoying some target shooting for fun, but nothing to this scale. This is kind of you've been driving this. This is one of your things that you enjoy.
Well, yeah, I mean, talking about growing up, my exposure to shooting growing up was once a week, or once during the week, a Boy Scout camp where we shot 22s at 25 yards. That was about...
Wait, every week?
No. Sorry. When I went up to summer camp 1 week, that was 1 week out of the year, was my exposure to shooting growing up. And then I didn't really shoot a whole lot until college. And it was really the first weekend I came down to LaTourneau University, and I was a freshman, and we were getting to know everybody in the dorm. And the guys were like, "We're going to the gun range. You want to come with?" And I was probably in the car before they finished the sentence, because I was like, "Yeah, let's do that." And since then, I've really had the shooting bug. And then I guess it was at an Ironcenturion event where we were like, "Hey, let's throw in some long range this one." And I was like, "Well, I'd never done that before." And we had Clint come out and teach that, and we had guys shooting at 1,000 yards. Mm-hmm. And I think all of us at that point, except for Clint, had really never shot that distance before. And I think we all kind of got the bug.
Yeah. I remember that because I was co-teaching that. Well, co-teaching. I was Clint's student assistant for that
You're
class.
His Vanna White.
Yes. So I was, making sure everything was prepped and helping deliver ammo and keeping guys in line and organized and stuff while he was teaching that. And just the content of what he was having to teach for shooting at extreme distances just blew my mind, because I realized that it was, I'd always just shot iron sights, 22s and things like that. Never even been big into anything that required a scope. And we're shooting now at distances that were really far, and stuff he's talking about stuff like measuring humidity and air temperature and wind direction and speed and which direction on the compass you're firing. And all of these things are apparently affect the shot, and I had never considered them before.
So yeah, that was a lot of fun. We got to go out and do that last weekend, and I guess there's 4 of us on staff that were out there. So we got to... Rudy had never done it before. Rudy was out there. Tyler has done it some, and both of them got to shoot. You were our designated spotter for the most part. Did you get to any trigger pulling?
Yeah, but not when we moved over to the closer range stuff. I did that. I was
Gotcha.
I was specifically wanted to test out some new stuff I had for my more close quarters setup. So I did that. I have shot on that range long distance a couple times, so I was content in the moment. But I have always found it so interesting that things like if you're shooting east versus north matter, and it matters because the earth is spinning, and it takes a bullet so long to get to where it's going. When you're shooting that far, the target moves.
Is in a different place. Yeah. Crazy.
And of course we don't feel that because we're standing on the ground, but the bullet being in the air, it starts to matter. It starts to slow down its rotational movement with the earth, or it's Coriolis force, right? Like whatever that is.
Yeah, Coriolis effect. But yeah, fortunately, there's calculators to help calculate all that. But it's a big nerd sport, right? Because all those different factors you have to take account for, and you have to compensate for, and there's some skill involved, and it's a lot of math, and it's fun. Something about putting a little tiny piece of lead half mile away, or I think I've gotten up to 0.8 miles is the farthest shot that I've made on a small silhouette target. Still searching for that mile shot.
Someone, when we've been out at the range, when shooting, has hit a
Mhm.
man-sized silhouette at a mile. You don't think that
Yeah.
was you don't think that was your shot?
It wasn't my because I wasn't shooting. I was spotting for that one. Um, but yes, it was my gun. I know my gun is capable now of that happening. So thanks, Phil, for pulling the trigger on that one. But can't wait till I actually get to be the one behind the scope when it happens. So you got to have like the right conditions, right weather, everything else. It's kind of a game of chance at that point. Things have to line up for people of mere mortal skill like us that don't get to train on this on a daily basis.
I have been impressed with just how much math goes into it, and thankful that we have modern calculators. Makes me wonder about the people who just were really prolific and really good snipers, for example, in past military conflicts. There's a pretty famous one from Vietnam, I think, who was really, really good, and they didn't have that stuff.
No, we are the shake and bake sniper generation. So and sniper is said obviously in jest here because none of us are of that caliber.
Not even close. Not even close. All right. Well, so welcome to the Ironcenturion podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. What we're going to be talking about on this episode is leadership and Tim Storm and some of the lessons he has learned and some of his life experience and how that has brought him to where he is now. Some of that feeds into curriculum and content for Ironcenturion. So we're talking about that. And Tim, you mentioned Boy Scout camp earlier. Mm-hmm. So let's start there. You were a Boy Scout, but why were you a Boy Scout?
Well, so I guess I was involved in Scouts from first grade on. It was something that my parents wanted to do as a ministry opportunity to get to know other adults that were in the area, and they're very proactive about that and getting to know other families for the purpose of sharing the gospel with them and being a part of their lives in that way. And to that end, they were able to accomplish those goals, and that was really neat to watch. But through that process, I got to grow from a lot of cool experiences as well. Not just the Pinewood Derby cars, which just recently got the experience of building my own Pinewood Derby car. And by my own, I mean I got to build my son's Pinewood Derby car. Yeah, because we all know it's the dads that build the sons' cars.
Absolutely.
Because when you're going for glory, like you can't just leave your craftsmanship skills through the chance and the hands of a 6-year-old. It just doesn't work like that. So yeah, I got to build my own Pinewood Derby car for the first time, and I was pretty excited about that. Only to find out, what's that?
How did it do?
Well, here's the downside. I got sent on a business trip the same week that Pinewood Derby happened. So my buddy Colby had to help my son out in that time, and he did okay. It was all right. Colby obviously didn't mess anything up, but it was the car was. We've got some lessons to learn. Thanks to Mark Rober for all of his tips and tricks on his wonderful YouTube channel that we use to maximize our performance. But just like my love of Formula One, we'll get back in there next season and improve the car and make some better strides. So we'll make progress. My son loves it.
Yeah. That's good. And this sounds like all of those meaningless sports interviews where they grab somebody like after a race or after a Super Bowl and say, how's it going? Right. And they're like, well, we just need to carry the ball more, and get more yards, and we need more touchdowns. It's like, yeah. Thanks.
That's the point.
So insightful. What I'm hearing you say is we just need a car that goes faster, has less friction, less drag, and does better.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Good.
Engineering.
Yeah.
We're going somewhere with all that. Oh, Boy Scouts. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So how far did you go in Boy Scouts? Because I think there's a lot of guys who were Boy Scouts at some point.
Yes. So my parents sat down with me. I was probably a sophomore, junior in high school at this time. And I was close to being done because all the high school stuff was starting to take precedence. I was in sports. I was in some, youth group at church and some other extracurricular activity things. And Boy Scouts was kind of like, all right, I've been doing this since first grade, kind of been there, done that. And I was kind of not really inclined to finish. But my parents were like, you made it this far, you need to go ahead and finish. Because it was supporting some other goals that I think we'll be talking about here soon. and I did. So I was able to finish and get my Eagle Scout, and I'm really thankful that I did, because it just opened up a lot of opportunities for me in the future that I never thought would come from that. And I think it's a whole nother episode that we can maybe talk about at some point, of those childhood development processes and what can you do to help your son develop leadership. Because we've got a lot of great people that we work with on a ministry side of things that I think are interested in those things and committed to those things. And
yeah, that sounds cool to me.
Yeah.
But something interesting that I know is, like, when you're a kid, being a Boy Scout is cool. I never was a Boy Scout, but it's cool. As I noticed, though, as soon as you become an adult, the only thing that matters when people talk about it is, did you become an Eagle Scout or not? And if you didn't, it's like, oh, okay, so you're in the Boy Scouts. But if you became an Eagle Scout, there still is an adult level. There's this level of there's some reverence for, oh, you did the thing all the way to the end.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And because the people you talk to, even the guys that were in Boy Scouts that didn't make it all the way, there's this, tinge of regret. Usually they're like, oh, I only made such and such a rank, or it's like, well, you still probably learned a whole bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And it's kind of a weird thing, is that there's this aura around it that people still bestow a lot of honor on that, for an achievement that you made as a teenager, probably.
Sure.
So
yeah, very early in life, that is a big deal, but maybe not as big a deal as some of the achievements people make within their careers.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, but you had some specific motivation for wanting to complete the Eagle Scout step, not just to complete Boy Scouts, but there was a resume building element to it, right?
Yes. So we've been friends long enough to know that I am a strange human being.
That is the understatement of the entire series of podcasts.
And my strangeness started out at a very young age. And one of the things I did when I was in 6th grade is I told my parents I want to go to the Naval Academy.
Wait, in what grade?
6th grade.
I don't think I remembered that it was that early.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I told them that in 6th grade, and I told them I want to go to the Naval Academy because I wanted to fly jets for the Navy. I wanted to fly Hornets.
That's the
FA-18.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that was my goal. I think they talk about, video games having a bad influence on kids, and all the violence and things. But this was an example of video games really propelling me in life to latch onto something that I really enjoyed. And it was, this 8-bit flight simulator. So I've shown my sons videos of what it looked like, and they were like, that was fun. It's like, you don't understand.
Like the early days of Microsoft Flight Simulator. What was that called? Microsoft.
So the one that I had on my computer was FA-18 Korea. You can go and look up the graphics. We'll probably put a link in the description. The graphics are terrible by any modern standards, but to a 7-year-old, they were amazing. So yeah, that kind of probably propelled me on this course. Because my parents didn't serve in the military, and I had a grandfather that served in Korea, but we didn't really come from a military family. So this was just kind of it was an interesting career path for me to want to pursue, I think.
Especially to be so committed to it in 6th grade. I don't think I know what college I wanted to go to until I was 18, and they said, you have to apply now. And I was like, okay. And I didn't just pick one. I applied to several and then picked Laterno, which is where we met. So that's kind of cool. But you're 6th grade, you had, obviously we now know that you didn't go to the Naval Academy, but we'll get there. So, but you knew that early on. Yes.
Well, I knew that. So I talked to pilots when I was a younger child, I guess, because that's what I was at that point. I talked to pilots, and they said, well, this is how we became pilots for the Navy. And most of them were Annapolis grads. A few of them made it through other courses, but I said, well, the probability of the people that I've talked to, they were Navy grads. So let's go through the Naval Academy and let's learn how to fly jets. So,
okay. So what does this have to do with being an Eagle Scout?
Well, that was one of the resume builders, because you have to get the approval of a congressman from your area to appoint you to the Naval Academy. That's just one of the steps.
You
So
can't
you
just
have to have,
you
no,
can't
you can't just apply. I mean, yeah, you've got to have extra things. So that was part of my attempt because they said, you've got to have X number of extracurricular activities. You've got to have good grades. You've got to have all these things. And Eagle Scout was one of those things that would stand out on a resume. So that was kind of my main driving force to want to get that done.
Well, it seems like that was right because as we just talked about, having your Eagle Scout still has some reverence among adults even today. So that was a
Yes.
thing. Okay.
Yes.
So you were then pursuing Naval Academy starting in sixth grade and
Mhm.
intentionally moving toward that and doing stuff to get ready for that.
Yes. And then something happened in, it was probably between my junior and senior year, that I grew a tremendous amount. I grew 8 inches that year.
In one calendar year,
in one school year, not even calendar year.
In one school year. So
Yes.
from September to May, you grew 8 inches.
Yes.
It's like an
And
inch.
I grew.
It's like an inch a month.
Yeah, it was ridiculous
That's
and unnecessary.
That's almost visible. Like you can almost like wait. Okay. So there's so many thoughts. That's I think I had known this, but I didn't have the timeline right. Maybe the amount that sounds physically painful.
Yeah, it was. Because you're like, your body is just stretching all the time.
It sounds
for those of you who don't, have never met me in person, I'm 6'8". So yeah, went from 6 foot to 6'8", in that school year, which there's some debate because at one point I measured 6'10", in high school. And my mother to this day will still tell you that I'm 6'10".
That's what I tell people.
Yeah. At that point, like, does 2 inches really make a difference? Probably not. But in my case, it actually did because I was too tall to go to the Naval Academy because they have a cutoff at 6'8". So the recruiters I talked to were pretty much just like, sorry, we don't really know what to tell you. Like, you're definitely too tall to fly jets, too tall to go to our school. And it was devastating. There was, so from 6th grade to 11th grade, essentially. So all those years of working towards that goal, which, at that phase of my life, that was a significant amount of my lifespan that was dedicated towards achieving that goal. That was now not even just a possibility of not happening. It would never, ever happen.
Through no agency of your own, right? Like you didn't do anything that you can control. Scripture
Except
says
maybe eating too many green beans.
Maybe. Scripture says hope deferred makes the heart sick. So I imagine that there was a significant load of disappointment and sadness accompanied with like watching yourself get closer and closer to that height mark and crossing it in one school year.
Yeah. Yeah. And throw on top of that 9/11 happening pretty close to that time frame as well. So wanting to go and be a part of our nation's response to that. So I wasn't choosing to join the military because of 9/11. 9/11 was just one of those like bolstering moments that was just like, no, this is really what I need to do.
Yeah, that was a huge catalyst and motivation for lots of people.
A lot of people. I mean,
I've read a series of military memoirs, and it's if they were alive at the time that 9/11 happened, it's often featured in their story.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that then had to change. Wow. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So in my junior year, I was going to go from being a fighter pilot to now figuring out a different school to go to that I actually wanted to go to, a different career path that and aviation at that point in my life was core. Like I wanted to be an aviator. I wanted to be around that fighter community. So I was like, well, let's rebuild. Let's figure out what to do with this. Let's figure out a way to not completely give up on the things that are important to me, and decided to pursue a degree in engineering. So I was like, well, if I can't fly them, let's build them. And yeah, we won't get into that story a whole lot, but suffice it to say, the Lord allowed that dream to happen. So I get to do that for my day job now, which is pretty cool.
That is cool. And I know a bit more about that, and I know we can't say a lot about it on microphones, and that's okay. But I do know that it's cool, and it's been exciting to get to see that. Like, I didn't know you when the focus was to become a fighter pilot, and then that hope was taken away. But I did know you in the aftermath of that, and
Yeah.
that the
We met in
you know,
college, for those of you who didn't know that.
yeah, and so the plan B of getting to build stuff like that is cool to get to see that you get to do some of that stuff.
Yeah, God is good.
Yeah. Okay. So the next best thing then, for you. Yeah. So then, let me ask you this, because it seems like the opportunity to go into the military was gone.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't stay true, actually.
Yeah. So when I was probably 18, I talked to every single branch of the military at some point during my senior year of high school, trying to figure something out. And each one of them turned me down because they're like, "You're how tall?" And there'd be this really long pause. And they're like, "Well, we're sorry, but you're too tall to join XYZ branch." Cool.
Sniper bait.
Yes. Brouhaha.
To bring us back to the the long range shooting that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
You were the target. So okay.
So there was that tension there, that I still had a desire to serve, and no outlet to do so. Well, so fast forward through college, I was in my first job right out of school, and I just remember sitting there. I hated the job. It was mind-numbingly boring, and a lot of my close friends were in Afghanistan. And I sat there like, what am I doing with my life? I've been married for about a year, and just that desire to serve was just still deep and strong. And I was like, you know what? Worst they can do is tell me no again. So I knew the Navy was out, because I didn't want to be on a ship. I just wanted to fly. Same for the Air Force. I
understand that the doorways inside ships are really, really small.
They're terrible. They're not built for people of my size or stature. It's just not a good, wouldn't be a good deal for me. So Navy was out, and the Marine Corps as well, because they're the little brother of the Navy.
I suspect that doesn't make Marines very happy, but
Air Force, that's another thing. I'd be more than happy to fly some Air Force jets, but the same thing applied. I said, I'll even sign a waiver saying, if, hey, I lose my legs below the knee in injection, so be it. And they kind of looked at me cross-eyed and said, no. So that left the the last branch, because Space Force wasn't a thing yet, so I couldn't go off and be Buzz Lightyear. But that left the Army, and I had some really strong pseudo big brothers in my life, that moved to where I went to high school when I was probably a sophomore. And these are two guys that they both said they're brothers, grew up in Canada, farm boys, and both said, we're going to join the Special Forces. And
that's not something you just like choose to do, though, right? Like,
yeah, they're strange, kind of like me, but even more strange, right? Where they're just like, we're going to do this. So we kind of laughed them off and said, yeah, whatever. As of this recording right now, both of them are currently Special Forces operators of different types. One of them is a Green Beret. The other one is a Special Operations Forces helicopter pilot with the Army, and they both achieved their goals. So they're pretty cool dudes, but they influenced me in a strong way to not make the Army my last choice, but make it the choice that I actually wanted to go and do. So I walked in the Army recruiter's office and I said, unless you can show me the reg that says I'm too tall to join, I'm going to sign the paperwork. And this was at the blessing of my wife too, because she knew that this was core and central to who I was, and this desire was not going to go away. So she had a job that she liked. We had a church that we really enjoyed being at. We had a small group. We were pretty settled in the Fort Worth area. So part of the compromise was that I wouldn't join active duty, but I would join the National Guard so that we could meet our same goals, but stay rooted and not have to be picked up and transplanted across the country at the will of the government.
Because that's a pretty common, like
Yeah.
everybody active duty moves and moves often.
So that was our compromise. And I was more than willing to do that. And yeah, I joined the United States Army in May 20th of 2011 was the day that I took my oath. So one of those dates that gets kind of burned into your mind.
Yeah, it's like college graduation or wedding date. You know, it's like one of those big life-changing pivot moments, right? Where you've done something big and significant, something outside of yourself. Yeah.
The gravity of what I did didn't hit me until the very first night of showing up at Fort Jackson for basic training. We got to Fort Jackson at 3:00 in the morning, dropped off on a bus with 60 other young men and women.
This is for boot camp?
This is for boot camp.
I've heard it's quite basic.
Yes. And they put us in this like barracks, right? And it's just a huge bay, bunch of bunk beds, very Spartan, very government-esque. And I remember laying in that bunk bed, knowing that they were going to be by in like 45 minutes to wake us up, to then start in processing, laying there thinking, what did I just do? Right? Because it was life-changing at that point. Like, I am now locked into this life path. Like, this isn't just a job opportunity. I'm like, you know what? I think we're good here.
I think that's common, at least in all the movies. Like the guy who's super gung ho for being in the military, like he joins and then boot camp like changes his mind, or at least a portion of guys change their mind. Life. So it's a different. It's a common thread that I've talked to many other veterans, and they're all like, yeah, we all kind of had that same exact experience of laying in that steel frame bed with, squeaky springs, and just like, what did we just get ourselves into? And it's just that massive unknown on the other side of what's on the other side of that door. And it's a fun journey. Is basic training any different for those who are in the National Guard versus active duty?
No. So we all, it's all a mixed bag. So you go.
So even in your group or your cohort, or like they weren't all National Guard?
Correct. No, it was National Guard and active duty. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's all of my major training events were like that too, where I was mixed in, because we're expected to perform at the same level and same tasks as the regular Army. So we go through the same federal training that regular Army soldiers go through.
That makes sense to me, I guess. Yeah.
Which is why when you look at like a National Guardsman, their uniform doesn't say National Guard; it says U.S. Army. So.
Okay. So we talked about your motivations that got you here. Well, I think an interesting question would just be the idea of, were there motivations that helped you get through basic training? Because I've heard that it can be challenging, and that there is a portion of people who not only go, what did I just do, but regret what they have just done. And so there's stuff that helps pull them through. What was that for you? I mean, you'd already done hard things before, and you'd wanted to be here for a long time. So it's finally that moment. But what kind of helped pull you through?
I'd never done hard things like that before. That was its own individual brand of difficult, because I was writing letters to my wife because we couldn't call or talk to each other on the phone. So there was no home support network that was there outside of hopefully someone sent you a letter that you could read once or twice a week. So it was really difficult. I had a group of drill sergeants that were all combat veterans from Iraq. Some of them were in some special operations units, which is unique. I found that wasn't really the case with a lot of people I've talked to, but they pushed us really hard. They were really mean, and they pushed us really hard. And at the time, it was one of those things that I absolutely hated, because I was like, these people are just being ridiculous. Because you can look over at the next platoon and their drill sergeants weren't like that. And we could tell that we were getting some special love and attention that wasn't commonly spread around everybody. So there was a lot of resentment in that time, and I didn't really understand the need for it.
Wait, this reminds me a little bit of, and not being in the military, I relate a lot of these things to movies, et cetera, that I've seen. But
Sure.
This sounds a bit like Band of Brothers and the training that they went through, and they're like extra hard for their group.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing you're talking about, right? So like a drill sergeant and a team that's just like, we have a higher standard than everybody else here, and we're going to make you adhere to it.
Yes. Yeah. The joke about Fort Jackson, because it's not Fort Benning. I wasn't there going through infantry basic training. This was like the basic training for the generic military occupational specialties. And since I was going through officer candidate school next, that's where they stuck us. So this is like your clerks, your medics, people that don't have like a combat specific MOS or military specialty. Military occupational specialty is what they call that. So that was where I got stuck. So they call Fort Jackson Relaxin Jackson because basic training is easy there. So that's all I'd heard up until that point. And then you get there and you have that moment. You're just like, this is not at all what was advertised.
This doesn't sound to me like this is easy. This doesn't feel easy.
No. So to get back to your question of what helped me get through it, this is where I really started to grasp the concept of brotherhood in a way that was completely new to me, in the sense that like I needed those other people in that platoon, for motivation, for challenge in a good way, and just for that emotional support of, I don't have any family, so this is now my de facto family. These other 30 people that we just met a few weeks ago. So,
and how long was the basic training for you? How long were you?
I think you're there for 10 weeks, and it's about 8 weeks of like intensive training.
That's a long time to be away from family and everybody that you know.
Yes.
And it's long enough to build a new family or a community of brotherhood.
Yeah. I mean, because you're with these people 24/7, and you're put through a lot.
So the ones who are training together are also the ones, I'm imagining, sleeping in the same barracks and eating in the mess hall together at the same time. Like, it's just continual community.
Yep. Yeah. And the cool thing about the Army is it's a melting pot. So you get people from all walks of life, all, different races and different backgrounds. And it's really neat, because when you're there in uniform, you're there to do a job, and people start to respect you for whether you can do the job or not. And that was really neat, because all those other things that the outside world, the civilian world, really cares about, the military is just like, are they good at their job or not? And that's how you establish rapport with other people. So it's really a performance-based culture a lot of times. Can you contribute to the team, or are you perpetually one of the people that brings the team down? And
is there a like, if you start, you finish, or is there an attrition rate? How does that work?
Basic training is kind of a machine that's designed to take civilian on one end and put soldier out on the other end.
You can't fail basic training, or
you can, but you have to try real hard.
You got to try real hard. Okay, so the group of people you started with, even though this was additionally grueling and hard, is most of the group of people you finished with.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so brotherhood was helpful and helped pull you through.
Yep.
Okay.
And I maintain contact with some of the guys that I went through basic with to this day. So interestingly enough, one of the guys that was, he was a state track championship from Indiana, and running is not my gig. So he was probably 3 or 4 years younger than I was. And so he was kind of like a little brother, but he was just like, I'm going to teach you how to run. And I was able to get some really good run times in during basic training, because he really pushed me hard. But we still keep in touch. I'm actually going to see him here in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And he popped up, and we'll get to this later, but he popped up at another part of the story completely unexpectedly, and it was really cool. So,
okay. So anything else from basic training, or what did you do next?
So next came officer candidate school, or OCS. And this was probably one of the only things that wasn't a federal training. This was a state level training.
So you chose this. So this sounds,
Yes.
is this optional?
Yes. I mean, it's optional in the sense that this was the next step in what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be an officer. I wanted to lead. That was something that was important to me. In retrospect, there's a lot of different ways to lead in the Army, and OCS isn't the only path to that.
Well, and I've also heard, please correct me if I'm wrong, I have heard that becoming an officer, OCS is the hardest or dumbest way to become an officer, is what I've heard, that there are easier ways to plan ahead to become an officer in the Army. Is that true or not?
There are easier ways. ROTC being one of them. So you can actually go to college and pursue this officership role at the same time, and the Army will pay for your schooling. I was not forward thinking enough to take that route. The other option is going through one of the service academies. So for the Army, that's West Point. Not an easy option, but also it's kind of on that 4-year plan. It's just you're there doing a military academy, and it's intense. OCS though is typically designed for people who have been a non-commissioned officer, so a sergeant of some sort, who want to then transition over to being an officer. That's who it was built for. It was built for people who had been to college. And so in World War II, for example, when OCS was stood up, it was designed for people who had already had a college degree. And that was, a lot of this came from the British and their way of thinking that, like, oh, you're a gentleman now, so now you can be suited to lead other men. That's where that idea perpetuated from. I found that a college degree does not a leader make. But anyway, that was a path that I had now embarked myself on. So the next thing for me was going through officer candidate school. Now, what the recruiter did not tell me, there's like probably a whole book you could write on lies a recruiter probably told you when you got into the service. One of the things that
I'm
he
sure lots of
conveniently
beers
left
have been
out,
bought for other Army buddies over things like that.
yes, was that this was not a guaranteed process, meaning that if I did not pass officer candidate school, I would be retasked at the needs of the Army for whatever they needed me to do. And I would have very little say in what came next. So
hang on, because there was a deal you had made with your wife, which was, we're not going to move. We're going to be here where we are.
Right. So I'd still stay in the National Guard, but it would have meant completely different job change. So I could have been a cook. I could have been a tank mechanic. I could have, been, fill in the blank.
Whatever the National Guard near Fort Worth needs you to do, you're now on the list and they can draft you.
Yes. So there's sharks in the water, metaphorically, of if I don't pass this, my life could be a lot more interesting for the next 4 years of this contract that I'm on to finish out. So so we show up at OCS, and the first day they tell us, look left, look right. These people aren't going to be here in a few weeks. And, that seems like something you'd see in a movie, kind of like, okay, haha, whatever. No, that's actually true. We started out with over 120 people in my class. By the time the class graduated, I was one of 29 graduates.
120 down to 29?
Yes.
So 75% of them are gone?
Yes.
And these are already people, they've all been through, they've already been through boot camp. They've been through, they're already, there's
some of them have already served for 6 or 7 years in the military, in the enlisted side. Some of them have combat experience. This
isn't just a pool of newbies. This is, some of them may be but the newest they could be.
Me, yeah.
But you're the newest they could be, right? You've already been through 8 weeks, 10 weeks of military training.
And my recruiter even told me, he's like, OCS could be hard for you because it's designed for people who have some military background. And when he said that, I was just like, oh, okay, hard. I can do hard. This was really hard.
Okay, so the spoiler is you make it, but because you're one of the 29, but most people don't. And I guess they had good reason for not making it. And some of them did. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like what you see in, some of these Navy SEAL boot camp videos of that first couple of months of this process. Now, the National Guard schedule is a little bit weird for how they do OCS. When you show up for federal OCS, you're just there for 14 weeks straight. The National Guard breaks it down to 1 weekend a month for 18 months, plus 2 weeks of continuous drill time at the beginning and the end of that training period. But in that early phase, it's just a weed out program. So it's you show up and they're just doing their best to break you.
They don't want to have to feed you if they don't like. They just want you off the rolls as fast as possible. If you're going to quit, do it now.
Yep. It's a lot of flutter kicks, a lot of push-ups, a lot of people throwing up. I mean, what you expect to see in the movies, that's what it was like. A lot of people just yelling it in your face, or as close as they could get to my face.
So, which yelling at your belly button.
Yeah. Or, when I was my face in the mud, then they could yell in my face. But I mean, it was a miserable time to be alive. And I was just like, again, what did I get myself into? There's no way I'm going to make it through this. Because growing up, I was never like the athlete. I was never the guy that, just loves sports. I was there because I loved my country and I loved the idea of what I was doing, but it wasn't because I was necessarily gifted in those ways.
And confirm.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. It's true.
I have watched you play ultimate Frisbee. Okay. So this was a process that happened over 18 months. And so it was in like these phases or these steps, and they were just hellacious moments when you'd go for like a weekend.
Right. So over that course, the majority of the dropouts happened in those first 2 phases out of the four phases that it takes to get through OCS. And yeah, so we just slowly progressed, and every month that I went down there, because we went down for, a 3-day weekend. Every month I was like, oh, this is going to probably be my last month. They'll probably kick me out after this one. And they didn't. So I kept on showing up until they finally were like, all right, you're done. But through that process, the Lord really taught me grit, taught me how to have grit. I made a joke one time with the Navy SEAL, and I was telling him about our hellacious process that we went through. And I said, OCS the class that I went through had a higher dropout rate than BUDS. And
Which immediately after BUDS is the initial school for Navy SEALs.
Right. It's the one that you see on TV and the one that's in all the Navy SEAL books. It is the school of schools. And immediately as those words were leaving my mouth, it was like I wanted to retract them and just curl up and die inside, because I realized the joke it wasn't funny. Because his experience and my experience were similar, but not. So I was just waiting for it. I was just like, all right, here it comes. I just made fun of one of the most difficult schools and compared it to my National Guard school. But his response is one that I will never forget. And he told me, he was like, God has a way of teaching all of us in a way that he desires to make us into the men he wants us to be. And I was like, that's really interesting. Because yes, that was a very difficult process, but God didn't call me to go through BUDS. God called me to go through OCS and empowered and equipped me to go and do that. And I say that because there's no way that I could have done it on my own. But that was very much a part of God's sanctification in my life to train me into the man and the leader that he has brought me to be.
So that actually leads into a question I was going to ask, and you just used that quote. But are there people that you admire in the military, or maybe they were motivations to join the military, or people that you've admired afterwards? You've mentioned a few. So this SEAL you just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your pseudo brothers.
Yep.
that said, "Hey, we're going to be in the special forces, both of us," and then they did. That's pretty cool. Are there others that you've admired that have had an impact on your life?
Yeah. So they're not going to be celebrity names that you've heard of, but they're the guys that I went through this stuff with. Justin Krieg was what we call him battle buddies while going through OCS, and he's now one of the staff members here on Ironcenturion. The dude's a stud. Um, we nearly died of dehydration on one of the land nav courses, and all these crazy things. And he was one that was always just like, we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And he is one of the main reasons that I probably made it to be an officer, quite honestly. And he's going through special forces training right now, because that's just the kind of stud he is.
Just keep going.
Yep. But that was the thing that's probably what I miss about the military most, is the caliber of people that were on that team, because it wasn't like those were rare instances. That's the majority of the people that are there. So the people that I serve with, I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and a tremendous amount of appreciation for the ways that they shaped me, all the way from my instructors that treated me like garbage at the time, is how I interpreted that, to realizing, no, their whole intent was to make me into a weapon, into somebody who would survive, had I gotten the chance to go to combat, and it was just a great group of people to be around, even the ones that were a little salty on the edges.
So it seems to me, because I've been tangentially connected to enough people in the military, a lot through you and through Ironcenturion, but others that I have known as well, that and even people in my family history, that you either run into people that you just admire deeply and they are significant positive influences on your life, or it seems like the bell curve falls the other direction, and somehow there's just these really ill-suited people who've made it through somehow and have some position or rank. So I'm curious to turn it to leadership, and I want to ask this question: are there some leadership lessons that you learned through your military career experience from watching or serving under a bad leader?
Yeah, so there are definitely bad leaders, and that was kind of fast forwarding through my military career. I ended up going back to OCS, not because I needed to repeat the school, but because they asked me to come back as an instructor there. And that's one of the common things that people say, is when you ask the question of why are you here, and they'll answer, well, because I had such and such as a really bad leader and I want to do better than they did. Okay, that's an answer, but I really don't like that answer, because what I like to see is, no, I feel compelled to lead because I think I can do a good job as a leader, because there's a whole bunch of positive reasons that you can want to be a leader, but trying to fix somebody's negative mistakes, I mean, I just don't see a real benefit to that, because you can't undo somebody else's life. Like, so if you're going to be good at it, if you're going to try to make a positive impact on your soldiers, on people that you lead, and that's in the civilian arena, that's in the military arena, either way, like, that should just be your focus, because as Christians, especially, that's our focus, because that's how Jesus led. Jesus led as a servant leader, and he was really good at what he did as a leader because he was humble, and he chose to put others first. And when I look at like those negative examples of leadership, especially kind of on this side of being done with my service, I look at those negative examples of what I did as a leader and as an early platoon leader and as an early second lieutenant, of just like those cringeworthy moments from just like, if I could just go back and redo that.
Time travel moments. We all have some of those time travel moments.
Yeah. Where you can just like almost like watch the video of yourself and just replay in your head and be like, I really did that wrong. So a lot of like those leadership lessons that I've learned from myself in the sense that, like, don't do that again. And a lot of them were really stemmed from pride, of wanting to be, especially as a newly minted officer. I was just like, well, I'm in charge now, so this is how it's going to work out. And just those moments of, buddy, come on, that's not how this is going to go. And the Lord was quick to show me the error of my ways a lot of those times, and it was humbling, um, to the point where I was like, okay, let's not do that again. But yeah, God really taught me a lot about how to be humble as a leader, and not just like showy humbleness, but true humility, by wanting to put the needs of others first. So yeah, I would say, the bad leaders that I saw were really primarily myself and things that I needed to do better.
That is a curveball answer that I wasn't expecting. Okay. Good. It's a good answer though. Okay. So you hang on. Let's talk a little bit more about that though. You said you went back to OCS, and I know that you did. You went back to OCS as an instructor there. And so what did that look like being an instructor there, and how did that go?
Well, so I had a few different options, at one point in my career and my military career, and they said, "This is an option to come back to the schoolhouse. We'd like you to come back." The one of my senior instructors was now running the schoolhouse at this time, and said, "Yeah, we'd love to have you down here." So I talked to my wife about it, and it seemed like a really good option. And at this time, Ironcenturion had already started, and we were already doing things. And I was like, this could be a great way for me to increase in my abilities as an instructor, as a teacher. So I said, let's go for it. And it was strange because that physical place and I've gotten over it having worked there now, but driving down, I still had those same knots in my stomach that I had as a student, that I was going back to the place of like pain and torment. And it was weird showing up that first day, knowing that my old instructors were still like, they're now promoted in rank and are running things now. But they were still going to be there. And there was that apprehension of seeing them again. And I'll never forget showing up the first night, because I showed up at night, like one of the only cars in the parking lot. I mean, I'd been texting and saying, all right, this is, kind of getting the feel for how this is all going to go down, and with my commander, and got all my stuff out, walking to the barracks in the dark. And from the bushes, I hear, "Halt, who goes there?" And I'm sure my face went completely white, because I recognized the voice immediately. It was the voice of my senior platoon trainer from when I went through previously. And he comes out of the bushes with with a night vision monocle on. And immediately I'm just like, we're back here again. Like we're back. And why did I do this? But no, he's.
So how many push-ups did you have to do right there? I do remember you texted me and told me ahead of time, like, "Hey, I'm going back. I'm a little nervous." I remember us talking about like you're going back, but it's the same place and it's some of the same people, and it just has a very powerful physical
stress
memory.
Connections.
Yeah. Well, so if I remember right, for a while you were an OCS instructor that was the helpful style of instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and then you became the helpful in the not as obvious sort of way instructor. I don't know exactly how does that work, and what happened there?
Yeah, so there's two different types of instructors there. They call them instructors and platoon trainers in the OCS world. So instructors do the job of what an ROTC instructor or professor would do, where they teach you military history, and they teach you, the customs and courtesies, and they teach you all the different things you need to know. So it's a lot of academic work. It's a lot of, book and training knowledge. So you teach a lot of different classes on how to approach different subjects. They teach you tactics from a classroom perspective and those types of things. So, I mean, it's a lot of learning that takes place in that 18-month time frame. So I did that for a while, and the schoolhouse always has a very dynamic environment, because you're only there for a little bit, because they want you to get back to your, other career opportunities in active service. So people rotate in and out pretty frequently. Well, at one point, some people had rotated off the platoon trainer side of things, and I went to the commander and I said, "Hey, I'd really like to try this role out. I've been teaching for a while." And they said, "Well, we can put you there and see how it goes." And I remember, so there's a physical difference with the instructor, with the platoon trainers, is that they wear a black hat. and they're called black hats. And the black hat may seem like a small gesture, right? It's not your normal camouflage patrol cap. It's black. What's the big difference? Except in OCS, you're drilled to have this like fear of people that wear the black hats because they can do mean and terrible things to you. So it's almost like, putting on a different costume, because once you put this on, like, you become a different person. Like, you're no longer that friendly, helpful instructor who wants to answer all their questions. There's no dumb questions. And, it's just the classroom environment to now, this is the person that yells at you and makes your life miserable. So it's very much the good cop, bad cop mentality. And when you put that hat on, you become the bad cop.
And I'm guessing that you were pretty terrible at that. I'm kidding, because even now I can see your eyes lighting up already again. And
awakening the dragon.
Yeah, I knew that would be a good fit for you, actually, long before you took that role, and then it turned out to be a great fit for you. Because as I mentioned in the episode when we were talking about hobbies, I mentioned briefly that there's your creativity mixes with a bit of mischievousness, and I think that worked, and you flourished really well in this black hat role.
Yeah. So I actually became, in short order, the senior platoon trainer for the schoolhouse. And yeah, I was the guy that people hated, as far as the students went. Hopefully my peers did not hate me. But I was the guy that would make people physically sick to their stomachs, because they knew when they drove down that they would see me. And my civilian coworkers, like, to this day, just can't wrap their minds around that, because it's so opposite, like, so Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of, like, my personality type. But it's a weird process, because this is around the time of my career when I was really starting to see things more from a servant leadership standpoint, in a tangible way. And it was weird because of how aggressively I was a servant leader in that position. Because I was making their lives miserable. Like, I was trying to push people out and quit. But what I was really trying to do is I was trying to instill that same level of discipline, going back to that talk about, why was I going through these drill sergeants and my own OCS instructors? Why were they making life so hard? Why were they teaching me to have this much grit and tenacity and resilience in all these different situations? And I realized it was like, this is a life skill. This isn't just an Army skill, but this is a life skill that so many people don't have. So many people can't stand up and say, I've been knocked down so many times, I'm not capable of doing what's on this, the next steps. But I still know that I need to do it. And I was helping to teach these young men and women what that looks like. And from a very practical standpoint too, I was responsible for training them should they have to lead others in combat. I was kind of the gatekeeper for, is this person capable of doing that? Is this person someone that I would want my soldiers that I'd left to come down to the schoolhouse? Would I want them to take my place at my old company and lead my platoon of my soldiers that I'd left? And that was kind of always like my gut check of, would I place these guys in charge of the ones that I left? Because they were like my family. They were the ones that I cared for and wanted to protect and wanted to have led well. So if I could answer yes to that question, I would, that's kind of like the check in my mind of, was I going to make your life even more miserable and try to make you quit on your own? Or was I going to kind of make you miserable enough so that you continue to develop as a leader? So either way, you were going to be miserable, but it was for different purposes.
It's almost like trying to interview and hire a babysitter, but you know that the babysitter is going to be taking your children into combat. And so you want to make sure it's going to be somebody who's really going to take care of those you care about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what are some ways? So you talked about grit, and what are some ways though that I, as a civilian or somebody who's not gone through some of these experiences, can learn or develop grit? You mentioned it's not something everybody has, but I think it can be cultivated. What are some
Absolutely.
ways that like I could do that on my own, or somebody could just enhance or maintain grit that they've developed?
So that's a question that we've tried to ask at Ironcenturion, and we've tried to wrap around our events. Is a lot of the guys that are coming do not have military backgrounds. So how can we introduce this element of grit that's so lacking in our culture? And adversity is the answer to that. If you're constantly looking for ways to avoid adversity, chances are you probably don't have grit. If you're constantly looking for the easy way, for things that come naturally, you probably don't have grit. Grit comes from, and Michael, I love the analogy that you give of the egg. And I don't know if we've said it on the podcast or not yet.
I don't think we have.
Why don't you talk through that, and I'll tell you how that applies to grit.
Okay. So I tell this story at the beginning of most of our events, which is about stress. And so I use the analogy of an egg. So the inside of an egg is the yolk, and that represents your comfort zone. It's where things grow and flourish and life comes from in some ways, but it's the comfort place. So it's really the comfort of like where things are warm and cozy. And it's maybe like your couch at home. It's the couch in front of the TV with a Coke in your hand and some chips and salsa. And so it's a comforting place, but nothing truly stretches or gets bigger there. And then the white of the egg, that is like the concentric circles, the circle around that is the growth zone. So that's where there's stress being introduced and you're no longer in your comfort zone. And that stress is helping you grow. You're learning something new. And then the outer edge is the stress zone, the overload zone, and that's the shell. And it's a very thin zone. And when you push through that shell, that's when people do things like quit OCS or quit buds. That's when they quit on their job. They go, they don't finish an assignment. They shut down on stuff. They can't learn anymore when they're in their stress zone. They can't relate well to others. They're physically and mentally just stressed beyond their breaking point. And so the goal at a lot of our Ironcenturion events is to recognize that most men spend their life outside of our events and outside of other events in life in the yoke, and they seek the yoke often. And so this is pushing people intentionally into the white zone, but not so far. A good teacher pushes them not all the way to the shell. But the cool thing about the yoke is the longer you spend out in the white, your yoke actually will stretch to catch up. So eventually, as you practice something, it becomes comfortable to you. And so things that were uncomfortable before now are comfortable to you. So that's the egg story I tell at our events.
So as an OCS platoon trainer, I would frequently push people right to the bitter edge of that egg shell. And sometimes on purpose would, push even harder so that the people would leave when they needed to. But a lot of times it was just to bring people to that point where grit was being developed. Because I want to say that grit portion is really only developed in that outer boundary layer, the part that's really close to the shell, because some things are difficult, like socially awkward things that you're just like, I need to do this because it's good for me. And that you can compel yourself to do. That you can say, yeah, let's go to this networking event when I hate spending time around people I don't know. Right.
You're not an engineer by any chance, are you, Tim?
No, we're not talking about me right now.
Of course not.
But yeah, so I think the thing with grit that's different than just normal stretching yourself and self-improvement, if you will, is that you need someone to take you there. And you need someone who's been there, and you need someone who can guide you in that area. It's not something that's done on your own. And I think the guys that try to do it on their own fail. And that's when I think it gets messy. This life is not meant to be done as a lone ranger. And that's the joy of brotherhood and discipleship that we get to be a part of, is that we get to guide other men on this journey and ourselves be guided on this journey. Like, I think it's a cool two-way street that when it happens in balance and when it happens the way it's intended to, I think God does some really cool things with how he's called us to grow. And I think that does involve other men. So to answer your question specifically, how can we develop in that? First of all, I think doing things that are physically challenging and difficult are good for you, whether you're an athlete or not. Because clearly I'm talking to the guys that aren't athletes right now. Like, that's not something that comes naturally to me. It's not something I like to do, but it's something that I know is good for me. So I'm going to go and climb that mountain with my buddies. I'm going to go and do the things that are outside of my physical comfort zone because I know it's going to push me to go do something hard. But then, on the spiritual side too, I think there's that calling of brotherhood and discipleship, that you need someone in your life that can challenge you and say, look, I see where you're kind of spiritually flabby right now, but I need you to be up here. I need you to deepen your understanding of what Scripture says. And it's someone who's been there before you and someone who's walked that path ahead of us, that knows and works in conjunction with the Holy Spirit to help in the sanctification process.
Well, going all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning, you completed your Eagle Scout, and that has some respect held to it. I think that's one of the things that people respect, is that they see you start and finish something that's relatively difficult. And that's where the respect comes from, right? So if you complete your college degree, that looks good on a resume because it shows your employer you can start and finish something hard, even if you get a job outside of the degree you got, or your master's, or whatever it is. It says you can start and finish something that is difficult, and that's that gritness. And I think a lot of from a job perspective, that's one thing employers are looking for, right? When things get difficult to you, do you quit or not? Because we're going to invest a lot of resources and pay you, and we don't want you to quit when this project becomes difficult. We want you to figure out how to make it work.
Right.
Yeah.
Paul talks about that too. That all runners are competing for the crown, right? But we're supposed to be running this life. The test, did you finish or not? That's a question that will be asked of us.
Yeah.
Did we persevere to the end? Nobody
cares who starts the race. It's who finishes it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to mention something about OCS that you probably won't, but to bring a bookend to that kind of path arc of your life. So not only did you rise to like the top black hat at your school here for the Texas National Guard, but you became a little bit legendary nationwide, so that when there were joint training events that would have other states involved, people coming would know that they were going to have to face you. They were going to have to face Storm. And that's pretty cool to know and think that you were that. And that's because you put a lot of care in digital. It wasn't just about being mean. We talked a lot about it before, even at the time when you were in that role. It wasn't just being mean for mean's sake. It was gatekeeping, as you mentioned before, those who merited the responsibility of leading others potentially into combat and not.
Yep.
And it's interesting now because I knew you at the time, but I didn't experience you in that role, right? But I know people who did. And just like you mentioned, the trepidation and the fear that you had going back to school and seeing people you knew that there were the instructors there are people that I know that have a real hard time. Like, I'll just walk up to you and say, "Hey, Tim," and they'll be in the room and they're just like, "You can't do that. Like, this, you can't just talk to him. You can't call him by his first name." and that's kind of neat to see. And it's not because, it's just because of the moment that you were able.
You want to explain how you know those people?
Yeah, because they're part of Ironcenturion now.
Yeah, so part of the Stockholm syndrome that I've I'm gotten so good at is I'm able to take my former students and bring them on staff.
So it's a love-hate relationship. It's very much like Michael Scott says, do I want to be loved or do I want to be respected? It's easy. I want people to be afraid of feared or respected, feared or loved. It's like, I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
Yes. Yeah. So that's been the neat thing, is that we've been able to bring on some of my former students onto staff and onto events as leaders. So I was like, I train these guys. I trust them. I know. And you come across some really, just it's part of the profession, part of, being who they are and what they're wanting to do. I respect them for that. Even though I didn't tell them that up front.
Of course, you can't
right.
let the black hat crack a little bit. You can't do that.
I got to meet some really cool people through being an instructor, and the students that I had were great people. And some of them, the strong believers, I've tried to bring on in different capacities and into what we're doing with Ironcenturion. And that's been really neat. But to go back on one thing to close the loop too on that, and this is a leadership step that I was taught that has been transformative in my growth as a leader. And and so I put these guys through 18 months of hell. I made their lives miserable. I kicked out a lot of their buddies, and they all, probably meet up and their beer drinking stories about how mean I was. At the end of all this, I took some time and I took the black hat off and I took out a notebook. And this is at the very, very end of their training, where as the course kind of comes to fruition, I transitioned to more of a mentoring role and less of an aggressive kind of filtering role, right, where I'm trying to weed people out.
Because those who should fail have failed by now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And once the class has gotten to a place where I'm just like, these are the people that need to finish and succeed and do well, that's when the tempo and everything else changes. So at the very end, I sat down with all of my classes and I said, okay, I've had 18 months of critiquing you. I'm going to open myself up now to ways that I could have done things better. And it became like a 2 or 3 hour discussion. And you just see their eyes kind of bug out for a second. They're just like, wait, you want us to do what? And the first time somebody recommended that process to me, they're like, you should consider doing this. I'm not going to say you have to, but it's a really good process to go through with your subordinates, is to have them come and tell you like, what are things that you're doing well, and not on a piece of paper, but face to face. And it
one-on-one or as a group?
As a group, because that's what made sense in this context. But I'm not saying it can't be done one-on-one. And it was really good, and I took earnest notes of what they were saying, and I think they were challenged by it too, because they're seeing, okay, there's a level of humility by opening yourself up to people you've literally, and you've known that you've like been a stressor in their lives for this period of time, like, and knowing that they can say whatever they want in this type of format, and just knowing like you're just gonna have to sit there and take it, right? And most of the time by that point, I think the rage in their eyes had subsided, and it was generally constructive feedback. And some of it was conversations of, why did you do things this way? So it was a back and forth conversation of where I got to kind of peel back the curtain and say, well, when you did this, we were trying to work on this. And it was good for all of us, I think. But best, I think, for me, because I was able to grow from a lot of what they had to see or say, and things that they saw that I was blind to. So I would say, if you're a leader, or if you serve in any type of leadership capacity, civilian or military, it doesn't matter. I think that is an excellent practice to go through on a regular basis with the people that you lead and serve, to see what your blind spots are and how you can improve as a leader.
That is a good advice. And that is something that would take some grit to do, because it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Yeah. A little bit on the fringe.
A lot bit uncomfortable.
A lot bit uncomfortable. All right. Something occurred to me. You mentioned the idea that growth isn't done best alone, that you need others to either be in person or be guiding you and taking you toward growth. And there's a way we've done that on the podcast is we've done like a book before, right? We've done an episode where we read a book in advance. We told people we're going to read it, read the book, and then talked about it and what we think about it and what did we learn from it. I feel like it might be time to do that again. And you had a suggestion that kind of fits this idea of growth and development, right?
Yeah. So there's a series. It's not a book per se. It is a lecture series. But by the time you listen to everything, it's almost like you've spent the same amount of time as you would listening to an audiobook, on a subject called spiritual formation. And it's a process that encapsulates all of what I think we're trying to talk about in terms of discipleship. Now, what does it look like for us to grow and to change and be made more into the likeness of Jesus? And it's one of those things that I think you can grow up and be in the church for a really long time, and be good at moralism, be good at, how do I make myself better? How do I look better in front of other people? How do I get rid of some of these ugly sins so I am a more acceptable Christian? And what that's doing is it's changing our behavior, but it's not necessarily changing our heart. And spiritual formation is all about changing our hearts so that the other things are a result of what's happening, and not like the goal of what's happening, right? Because it's a subtle difference, but it's an incredibly impactful difference if you're pursuing. One of my pastors has said it this way, that if we're pursuing the fruit, but we're not doing the work to get there, right? All the fruits of the Spirit, it's almost like you're taking a dead tree and you're stapling live fruit to it, right? And it's just that visual imagery.
I just have this hilarious image of somebody trying to nail a banana to the side of a dead tree.
Yeah. And it's just like, and it's the image sticks with you because it's ridiculous. But what should be happening is the tree is healthy and therefore it is producing fruit. And I think that's the whole entire intent of spiritual formation. So what I would say is let's take some time and let's go through that series individually, and then we'll meet up on a podcast episode and talk about it. So we'll go ahead and link all those lectures in the comments in our show notes. So however you're listening to us, whether that's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple or whatever, you should be able to get to those comments and see the links there. But let's go ahead and talk about what spiritual formation is, why we should be concerned about it as believers, and how we can use it to help each other grow, and how we can use it to challenge people that we're leading.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with this series. I heard about it from you, but I'll tell you, I mean, you told us to listen to read 10 Signs of Leadership Crash, and we talked about that, and you were right. That was fantastic. So this sounds good. I'll trust you again, and we can do it. I don't know anything about it other than, like, you mentioned it, I think, briefly to me for the first time this week. So
yeah, so Tyler is one of the guys on our staff, and he recently brought it to my attention again. I'd listened to it. I think the series was initially done in 2006. I listened to it probably 2012-ish timeframe, and I've just recently started listening to it again. But Tyler has said that it's been transformative in his understanding of who Christ is. So I think that's a pretty solid recommendation.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
So.
Okay. So we'll put links for other people so they can listen in advance too, if they want to. And then you'll send me some links so I can do this. And then sometime again, we'll meet back here and we'll talk about what we learned and what we like from it. Right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Ironcenturion podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you next time.
See you later.
Thank you for listening to the Ironcenturion podcast. We're thankful for the support of listeners like you who support this podcast through donations. If you'd like to be a part of our support team, please visit ironcenturion.org/donate. For more information on what it means to be a leader for Christ or how you can get involved, check out ironcenturion.org.